Hello, dear listener. Welcome to my channel, where stories are so scary that only the bravest and most fearless can listen. If you are sure that you are brave enough, subscribe to my channel and I will question your bravery. But before you do, let me warn you, these stories are not for the faint of heart. They are not for people who scare easily. They are for people with ice in their veins and darkness in their hearts. If you are one of those people, then I welcome you. Come closer, listen closely, and prepare yourself for the horror that awaits. Little background information. From when I was a little kid, I would often have weird sleep paralysis experiences. My body would become locked up at night when I was fully consciously aware. It scared the hell out of me at the time. I would scream to break the paralysis, to the point that my parents became very worried about me. I remember telling my dad about it at one point when I was like 5 years old. Then, when I was a teenager, I had a semi-significant experience where I was napping on a couch on a lazy, quiet afternoon, and my legs started to float above my body. But I was tethered at the head. This sparked an interest in these experiences, and when I was in college, I began to research astral projection, along with some significant drug experimentation. I was never able to achieve astral projection despite many attempts at meditation. The closest I came was some very mild vibrations on my skin. It just felt like goosebumps. I then became a physician, and through the progression of scientific medical training, chalked these experiences up to just some weird neural firing. I explained my experiences as just your typical sleep paralysis. I have also in recent years become a staunch atheist, choosing to only believe in what is tangible in this world. About a year ago, I began to experience something new though. About once a month, I would wake up from a dead sleep to very intense vibrations and a feeling that I was rushing toward the ceiling of my room. I was also physically paralyzed. When I was a child, the paralysis terrified me. However, now that I was older, I just calmly would observe what was happening. Again, over the last year, I just thought it was a weird neural thing that happens to some people. The brain, after all, is a mystery in many ways. However, because of my previous interests in astral projection over the last year, every time I experience the vibrations and rushing, I attempt to break through. This always has resulted in me opening my physical eyes and just waking up. My skin always tingles a little bit after these experiences. Then, last night happened. This is one of the most profound experiences in my life. My girlfriend had woken up around 4 a.m. to go to work, and woke me up in the process, said goodbye, and I went back to sleep. It was raining out, and I was sort of drifting in and out. I had a very clear dream that involved me fighting some sort of demon to save a bunch of people. I had godlike powers in the dream, and felt very powerful. I don't think it was any different than any other normal dream. It clearly didn't feel any different. The dream ended, and I was lying in bed, semi-awake in my room, when all of a sudden I simultaneously became paralyzed and became aware that there was a woman standing in my room. It was like I was looking through squinted eyes. Remember, I was paralyzed. I was confused by sleep, and all I was thinking was why my girlfriend had come back home. The woman walked over to the side of my bed, and it was then that I realized it was not my girlfriend. I have no idea why I wasn't terrified, but I wasn't. I just stayed calm. I tried to kick her, but my foot wouldn't move. Then the vibration started. It felt the same as what I have been experiencing for the last year, except exponentially stronger. If I had to describe what I was feeling in one word, it would be electricity. As a physician, it's what I would imagine an epileptic seizure feels like. My body was supercharged, vibrating, and I felt the same rushing upward. I knew that this experience was very different than what I had felt before. It felt like I was finally getting a chance to break through. So I rolled my body, and it worked perfectly. I rolled out of my body, and I mean I was out. I was fully consciously aware of everything, but I was still semi-paralyzed. I could only see through slits in my eyes, and I watched the woman walk out of my apartment and sort of drift through the wall. I was floating around my ceiling, willing myself to burst through the roof or wall, anything. Gradually, I slowly floated back to my body. It still felt like every part of me was supercharged, though. Electricity was at my fingertips, in my brain, in my eyes. It seemed like I could feel it in the air. So I thought I'd have another go at it, and rolled out again. This time, I was more upright, and I could see my room a little better. It was sort of like I was drunk, though, like I was floating upright, but at an angle, so my head was scraping along the wall. All I could think about was how solid the wall felt. I was amazed at how concrete it was, like completely tangible. I was able to float around and observe a little more, then gradually floated to the floor. But I was propped up against my nightstand. I was lighter than air, though, so the awkward angle didn't hurt or anything. I was thinking that if I were to wake up, I would fall to the ground. I must have stayed like that for about 10 minutes, paralyzed, propped up against the nightstand with my whole body sort of floating. Then I rolled back into my body and opened my eyes. Through this entire experience, I was fully consciously aware, and it was this that has convinced me I experienced for the first time something that exists outside of this three-dimensional world. The woman, the things I felt, the electricity. This wasn't a mind trick in even the slightest bit. Now, I truly am a natural skeptic, but this has blown me away. I've been giddy all day at work, like I was allowed to see behind the curtain for the slightest bit of time. I believe the woman, or being that came into my bedroom, helped supercharge me, if you will. And the feeling she left me with was that there is so much more to see, explore, and experience. My mother told me a few years ago that I was a weird kid, for she never had to send me to bed while I was growing up. I would always tell her when I was done for the day, and off to bed I'd go. I laughed and asked, "Do you know why?" She shook her head, so I told her the truth of the matter. My nighttime activities were far more real and exciting than being in the body during the day. When my head hit the pillow, I'd literally take off. I'd stand on the edge of the bed, launch myself out the window, and my adventures would begin. I would soar over rooftops, sometimes peering into windows, and could travel long distances in a blink of an eye. Frequently, I would land and mingle with the people I found myself amongst. Often they were speaking foreign languages which I could not understand. Usually I was alone, but occasionally was accompanied by either a cat or a dove perched on my shoulder. On one trip it was both. Sometimes I would hear the most ethereal, gorgeous music during the trips. I could see the people, but they could not see me, for I would constantly test that fact. I would board a bus and ride around the city I was in, or take a stroll through a building of interest. Mostly I loved flying above the terrain and looking down at our beautiful earth. All of my senses seemed to be heightened in that state, and the music and colors were unbelievable. What frustrated me the most was my inability to stay aware of how I re-entered my body. One night, I determined to make a great effort to see how that was accomplished. I was always aware when my trip was about to end, for I'd begin to feel a drain of energy. It was like a sudden weakness, or a tug drawing me back to my body. This night, I found myself losing momentum while flying over an open wooded area, and suddenly I came upon a large construction site. A huge masonry building with walls about 20 feet high, not under roof yet. I slowly settled in the unfinished interior, and my last thought was, oh nuts, now what do I do? I never succeeded in discerning how I re-entered my body, but just continued to enjoy the nighttime adventures. Years later, one evening a spiritual studies group meeting had to be aborted because of blizzard-type weather. There were only 4 of us there in lieu of the normal 20 who attended. One was a hypnotherapist, so we began an experiment. My parents were spending the winter in Florida, so our goal was for me to pay them an astral visit to see what was happening there, record my impressions at this end, then call them for verification of where they were and what they were doing at that exact time. I left my body, flying due east from Ohio to avoid the weather, and followed the east coast down to Florida. When I arrived at the parents' house, I found that my aunt and uncle were visiting them. Uncle had a cane, leaned against the side of his chair. He normally didn't have one. They had just finished dinner together. Bob was watching TV. Mom was doing the dishes in the kitchen. I tried very hard to get her attention, even attempting to pull on her dish towel as she held it in her hand, but she remained unaware. In a phone call later to them, Mom verified to a T all that I saw on that trip. I gave her no clues other than asking her where they were and what they were doing on that night at the time. Turns out that Uncle Vic had sprained his ankle, and that explained the temporary cane. Apparently, there's much more to this 3-dimensional experience than meets the eye. An OBE is an out-of-body experience. So how about an OBE with similarities to a near-death experience? It is the closest explanation I can come up with to explain my event. As an adult now, I'm describing something that happened to me as a kid, aged about 11. On a summer afternoon, we went shopping a short distance from our house. This was a quick event that happened before we got home. I was lying down in the back seat of my mother's car, while my mother and sister talked in the front seat. I began to really wonder and say stuff to myself. I wonder what it's like to be dead. I could have momentarily shut my eyes. I don't know. Suddenly, I was in a black, empty space. I was instantly transported into this place. I remember the sunny day, thinking about death. And right as I was thinking about death, I entered the void. Total black emptiness. Seemingly unending space. And it doesn't matter where you are, because it is all the same. I didn't move in this. I was just a consciousness in the void, amazed at the difference between life and death. Just everything gone. I was very worried to be there, as it seemed to be so finite. The end. No second chance. I don't want to be here. To me, I figured this meant that when I died, I could return to this place if I didn't try to give meaning to my life. And for me, the instant answer was to help others. The thoughts in my mind were very prominent in the void. The only sound being my thoughts made the void very lonely. Without distractions, you can hear yourself very well. My state of alertness and consciousness were the same as before and after the event. I didn't want to go to this void again. The emotions I went through were dismay, a feeling of abrupt and unexpected ending, and a wonder about if I were let out of this place, how could I feel good about my life if I had to arrive here again? And then fear bordering on desperation, ending with a deep willingness to go back to my day-to-day life. I came to a point where I truly wanted out of that dark place. I was back in my car, looking around, feeling very relieved. At the time, I viewed this as a real event because I was awake during the short car ride. As I was repeating the question, I entered the black void, and I kept up the pattern of my own thoughts before, during, and after the experience. I remember instantly coming out of the void and being conscious of being in the back seat with a steady stream of thought. I was alert at all times. It probably took less than a minute for me to just flash into the void place. Go there, quickly contemplate the place and what to do with life if given the chance. Stay there long enough to feel stuck, and then get frightened enough to will myself out. Needless to say, I'm an environmentalist now. When I was 14 years old, I was really ill. My parents took me to the emergency room. They needed to operate immediately. I opened my eyes in the middle of surgery, and I saw lights. I heard the nurses and doctors talking. The anesthetics didn't work. I need more. I saw the doctors carrying on, doing something in me. I heard one doctor saying, "Nurse, give me more oxygen." I turned my head to see the nurse, and this was scary. I saw the nurse taking an oxygen mask, but she didn't put it on my face. She didn't even look at me. She put the mask behind me. When I opened my eyes again, I was floating in the corner of a corridor of the hospital. I felt strange floating, but I saw my mom and dad talking to a doctor. Then she was screaming, but I couldn't hear. The doctor only shook his head with negativity, and I thought, I'm dead. I'm a spirit. I wanted to go with my mom and tell her that I loved her, but I couldn't move. Then, I felt something like a giant vacuum cleaner dragging me with absolute velocity. I could feel the air. After that, I saw the light. Small at first, when I was speeding so fast. Then I went inside the light because I didn't feel anything. I felt a sense of infinite peace. However, when I opened my eyes, I saw my mom at my side, and I realized I had come back to the real world. A lot of weird things had been going on in my life, and I had been searching for answers in more unknown places, as I had many times before. In the past couple of weeks, I've been having trouble sleeping, which wasn't abnormal at all since I was a teenager. I've read a lot about out-of-body experiences and abductions and UFOs and the sort, so I wasn't very afraid. And when these weird happenings occurred, I'd almost immediately recognize what was going on. For maybe the 10th time or so this past couple of weeks, I was hearing this strange, soft, whirling sound that reminded me of locusts, and I immediately knew I was trying to have an out-of-body experience. I opened my eyes and saw a floating light that was jelly-like and changed colors a lot. Bright reds, pinks, greens, blues, and yellow, neonish, just buzzing merrily above me. It filled me with a joy. It made me feel safe. So I just watched it for a while and smiled. Now, I remember reading that if you see a light of some sort, to watch it, and it will help you bring you out of your body for an OBE. So, I was watching it, and at the corner of my eye, I started to see a shadow crawling, slowly standing up. I diverted my attention to the shadowy figure, and it was that of a man. The light, still in my peripheral vision, the man smiled at me, yet he had no face, just shadow. It made me feel even more safe though, and I have a hunch he may have been one of my spirit guides. He held out his hand, and I slowly took it, still smiling. The next thing I remember is, while still hearing that eerie, whirling sound, I'm transported back to my body, and the sound subsides, and my eyes open again. This just happened recently, and really got me spooked. I've always been able to experience lucid dreaming, but I had trouble staying lucid or accomplishing tasks while in a lucid state. So I decided I would try some galantamine and choline, as it's supposed to help with lucidity. I fell asleep and set my alarm for 5 hours. I woke up and took the pills and went back to sleep. This is when things got weird. I started to drift off to sleep, but was very aware of my surroundings. I saw shadow people everywhere, but they didn't seem to notice me. They were conversing amongst themselves, but I couldn't make out any conversations. It sounded like a room full of people all talking at once. As I looked around, I could see my door. I always sleep with my door closed, and I noticed that it was now open, and this startled me. Because of the angle, I couldn't clearly see into the hallway, but I could hear over all the talking my father's voice calling to me. As it got closer, I realized it wasn't my father. Then I saw the hand of whatever it was. The hand was mutated and deformed, and looked hideous. I popped awake and sat up in my bed. It was very hard to tell if I was awake or not, because I had such awareness in the previous dream. I walked downstairs and realized I was indeed awake. I was very spooked and feared falling back to sleep because of how unusual the experience was. I waited about 30 minutes and decided it was just a dream and wanted to try again. I knew the pills would still work, so I went back to my room and laid down. Before I knew it, I was flying over my city. It was dark out, still being very early in the morning. As I flew, things started getting very blurry for some reason. So in a loud, clear voice, I yelled, "Clarity now!" Everything came back into focus, and I saw a pretty blonde woman, about late 30s, sitting and looking out the window. I flew over to her and into her window. She had a curious look about her, as if she knew I was there, but I wasn't sure. She walked over and made a cup of tea and sat down to drink it at a glass table. I decided I had better go because she seemed to be uncomfortable with my presence being there. I sunk through the floor into the downstairs and walked outside through the closed door. I thought of my friend Jordan, who I hadn't seen for a long time. I decided to pay him a visit, and I was transported to his apartment. He had some girls over. I was talking with them about the plans for the day. They left, and I was alone in the apartment. Now, for some reason, I was feeling very drained. I decided to lie down for a bit, and as I did, I could feel myself roll out of the dream body I was occupying. As I rolled out, I turned and looked and could see the body I was previously in. I could see the details in my face as I took a breath. I started to freak out a little because I hadn't experienced seeing my body before. As I started to get worked up, everything started shaking, and I could feel myself being pulled into that body again. I calmed down and decided to just go with it. Once I had calmed down, everything became clear again, and I could notice a significant difference in how I felt. I was full of energy and felt extremely light. I left my old dream body, and in this new body, I flew down to the street from the balcony. As I was standing there in the street, I remembered one of those things I wanted to try when lucid dreaming. Time travel. I said in a clear voice, I want to go back in time. I was in a long tunnel with a light at the end. It seemed like a wormhole mixed with a subway tunnel. I was moving very fast through this tunnel, and as I did, I looked at my hands. My hands had a text that I didn't recognize emanating from them. The letters were gold and had a brilliant light to them. Because I was distracted with my hands, I hadn't realized I had stopped moving. I was on the same street as before, but everything was different. The road was dirt, and there were people dressed in 1800s era clothing walking everywhere. The buildings were all made of wood and were 2 stories. I walked the street, and no one even knew I was there. Everything was so bright and dirty. I was about to go explore this new world when I saw that the same blonde woman from before, sitting in one of the windows. She was now looking right at me. I found this to be very unusual, as no one else could really see me. She motioned for me to come to her, so I flew up to her and entered through the wall. I was quite surprised when she began to talk. She said, "You were new, aren't you?" I said, "I don't know, I guess." I was a little confused by the question. She told me I needed to get rid of the text on my hands. She wanted me to hold my hands out and repeat after her. I began to put my hands out, and she started speaking some scary sounding language. It felt more like a curse than anything else, and something didn't seem right. I didn't repeat the words, and she opened one eye and looked at me in realization that I wasn't going to follow along. She opened her other eye and smiled an understanding smile. It still seemed very creepy. A glowing silhouette of a person appeared and dissipated right in front of us. She got excited and said, "Come on, let's go. We have to follow that." We both then went to the wall and floated down the street. She was floating in front of me. Remembering the authority I have in Christ, I uttered in my breath, "Show me your true form." There was no way she could have heard me, but she stopped dead in her tracks, as if she knew what I had just done. She then turned around and now appeared as a deformed demon woman. And she was angry too. She flew at me and tried to attack me, I ducked down and grabbed her by the foot. I then picked her up and slammed her on the ground. Before she could get up, I returned to the body at Jordan's apartment, then to the body in my own room. At one time, I could see my room from one eye and Jordan's apartment from the other, almost like a split screen on a video game. I then shook my head really hard and sat straight up in my bed. Once again, I didn't know for sure if I was awake or not, as I had so much conscious clarity in my dream state. After a few minutes, I realized I was awake. I vowed not to play with lucid dreaming again, but the mystery still remains. I found that once I learned to hover in a deep meditative state, I would eventually attract benevolent beings. Upon waking, I would be so excited because they would teach me concepts that I could never conceive. For a year and a half, I became a regular meditator. Around 5 times, I have received positive one-to-one downloads, each experience lasting up to 20 minutes. When I read back now on my writing, I can see that the guidance I received these times was always positive and helpful on a human lifestyle level. The very last time, however, exactly 2 years ago in May, I experienced something very disturbing. Lying on my bed at home, in a Melbourne metro suburb, around 4 p.m., television on, physically relaxed and very comfortable, I began to enter the zone. To the corner of my eye, I saw gliding into my bedroom through a slightly open door was something I can best describe as a swerving black cloak. It was gliding and bobbing as if controlled. It very quickly came toward me and hovered near the opening of my mouth as I was exhaling. As I next inhaled, it glided with the tempo of my breath and swooshed in my mouth. I nervously felt this menacing hooded being slide inside. It all happened so quickly. With my inhalation, it swiftly rode in with my breath. I knew I was being invaded. But then, exactly like a mini vacuum, when I exhaled, the entity exited through my mouth and sucked every particle of my last exhaling breath. Instantly, I was gone from the world. I awoke from a lying down position into a completely black void. No sound, no vision. I was in a state of confusion. After just a few seconds, as my comprehension evolved, I realized at that very moment, I was, in effect, dead. Once this thought took hold, I was confronted with a very fast-moving reel of pictures of me and my entire life. My childhood, me today, everything. So quickly and sharply I could see all the opportunities laid out for me. These opportunities were highlighted because I hadn't beckoned them when they were in front of me during my lifetime. It was as though another set of wise, retrospective eyes were assessing the losses I had carelessly flung away from my path. Such a difficult idea to explain. But in a sense, I realized 100% that my wisdom had come too late. I started to panic at the idea of being dead. Silence of death, in a thick solitary blackness, was just not part of the plan I had for my life at this time. The despair and mourning I felt this time was truly a heavy feeling for me. I cried deeply. I felt haunted, gutted. Why couldn't I have seen everything so clearly when I was back in my body? Why did I waste myself? But I couldn't come back, and had no one to point the finger at. No one to blame but myself. I was alone. I was finished. I knew that I could not come back. It was final. A thought consciousness surrounded me. It was communicating what I had forgotten from my life. Then I suddenly remembered. Yes, remember. I had a purpose. Exactly what I was supposed to do here with my time. Then I awoke. What? In the back seat. It was in 1995, in rural Northants, England. My daughter Abby, then 17, had just passed her driving test, and so we bought a little second-hand car. One morning, at about 4:15 a.m., I was ready to set out for work. Our driveway was only one car wide, and my daughter, as worryingly usual at that age, had returned home late in the evening, parking behind my car. This meant I had to start her car up, back it up before backing my own out, and then putting her car out in the driveway. This one morning, I backed hers out, leaving her engine running and the driver's door open, which meant the interior light was on. I should mention it was still dark outside. I walked back to reverse my own car, but happened to look back at Abby's car. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw a young lady sitting in the near side back seat. It was a two-door car. Seemingly, she was studying her makeup and pampering. This was full color, nothing gray nor translucent. I thought, what on earth? Or such like, and immediately ran toward the car, only to find no one there. I often wondered that her spirit was still there, but my own rationale had blocked my perception. I only told Abby many years later, as I didn't want to scare her. To my surprise, she said she was usually aware of a benign presence behind her when she was driving that car. Number 2, Black Cloud Spirit. We moved into a house that used to be part of a military base in Kearns, Utah. I heard that in the 1970s, there was a 2-plane crash above that neighborhood. Also, there is a serial killer who lives around there right now that the police have not been able to catch. Those are things that can be proved. This next part, you have to take my word. For about a year in my house, little things like sounds and lights going on and off would happen daily. I was good with that. But I started drinking and being sad all the time for no reason. And then all hell broke loose. One night, I was drinking with a friend, and I invited the spirit to hang with us. Big mistake. I don't know, but my friend told me my eyes turned black, and I started speaking another language. She got scared and immediately went home. A few nights later, a black cloud filled my room. I shook my husband and told him I was terrified. He sat straight up, looked at me in the eye, and said with a deeper voice than his own, "I am not your husband." I was scared as hell. He later said he could feel that happen, as if he were not in control of his own body. Another time, I was having a conversation with some type of evil spirit in my head while I was unable to move my body and barely able to have my own thoughts. The conversation was basically telling me to deny God. I denied the demonic advances and begged God for help. The spirit left, as if he ran with fear. Numerous things such as that kept happening to the point I would have my children stay with my grandparents. And I was too afraid to shower or do anything alone. I had some church people come by and bless my home, and I was told to quit drinking, which I did. Later that same night, a demonic voice was outside my bedroom window, telling me to let him in. With authority, I screamed no. And we have since moved. But I know that it is an evil place. And I hope the best for anyone who lives there next. Number 3. Answer from another dimension. On September 30th, 2015, I went to the grocery store to pick up a few things to complete lunch and dinner that day. I purchased 1 purple onion, 1 Vidalia onion, a pack of thin bread slices, a carton of eggs, and 1 brown mustard. That afternoon, I made a sandwich using 1 slice of purple onion. I cut off the root end and took 1 additional slice from my sandwich. I returned the purple onion to my refrigerator bin for later use. The next morning, I opened my fridge. The onion was no longer in the bin. It was on the shelf where I first placed it when I initially brought it home. And it was whole and uncut. No one had entered my home to replace the onion. I stood at the door of my fridge with the chill going up my spine and down my arms. I stepped back to think, and immediately went to my garbage to confirm I used the purple onion the day before. There I found the butt end of the purple onion I cut off earlier. It may not be a significant story with a major leap in time, but the weeks before this event, I had begun researching string theory and asking out loud if there was anyone who could hear me within another dimension to try and communicate with evidence. I don't want to sound crazy, but until it happens to you, everyone who experiences something similar is a flake. This really happened. I took pictures, and I wish I had the ability to match the DNA of the onion to the end, as I still have them. I can't get past the event, and it has completely reoriented my life focus. Number 4. Ouija spirit provides proof. It was around August 13th or 15th when this happened. I was 14. It happened in Vero Beach, Florida. Now, I'm completely open to the spiritual world and paranormal stuff. It runs in my family, coming from a long line of what people would call witches. I love playing with Ouija boards. I think it's so cool to talk with spirits. Well, I was over at my aunt's place with my mom and 2 of my aunts, both of which lived there, and we decided to play with a Ouija board. We got connected with the first spirit almost instantly, but he was a boss. He spoke Creole, which none of us playing with the Ouija board spoke. Another spirit connected with us instantly after we said goodbye to the last one. This one was a little girl. We talked to her for at least an hour. Her name was Ava. And during that hour conversation, we just asked her normal questions like, how old are you? Why are you here in this house, etc. And then it started getting weird. My aunt has 2 cats and 3 dogs. The 2 cats ran from one of my aunt's rooms to the back door, which is in the kitchen, where my back was facing. I was wondering why the cats ran so abruptly and randomly over there and just sat there staring at the top of the door. So I proceeded to ask Eva, the spirit, if we were alone. She told us no. She said that there was someone by the door. I understood, and it was the spirit we had said goodbye to earlier, the one that didn't speak English, so she couldn't tell him to go away. I then asked if she was standing with the man by the door, and she told us no. I asked her where she was standing or sitting, and she said, by a dog. Like I said, my aunt has 3 dogs. 1 light fawn color, 1 dark brown, and 1 light brown. I asked her which dog, and she said, dark brown. The dark brown dog was sitting on the couch behind my mother. I asked Ava if she was behind the blonde woman, because my mother was blonde at the time, and she said yes. I asked her to prove it, and she touched my mom's shoulder and pushed a jacket off the lamp next to my mother. My mother was immediately covered in goosebumps, and her hair was standing on end. Soon we found out all Ava wanted was to cross over, because her grandfather left her behind when he had crossed. Ooh. Ooh. Number 5. Ghost of the Haunted Maze. I was working in a Halloween time haunted house called the Theater of the Lost Souls in Shelley, Idaho. I happened to be working in a pitch black maze on opening night when I started to hear someone rubbing against a black plastic covering inside the maze. I assumed that it was just my cloak and abandoned the thought that a ghost was right behind me. However, the thought of me running my cloak against the covering left me after I started hearing footsteps walking right behind me. I had the guy running the monitor go and check all the cameras in the maze at about 9:30, because that's when I heard all the footsteps. He checked them a couple of times and said that I was the only one in there all that time. Number 6. Family history of paranormal events. There have been many paranormal and supernatural experiences in my family. I will start out with my dad's stories, from oldest to newest. When my dad was young, about 7 years old, he was camping in Missouri with his family, mother, father, sister, when a cowboy-looking guy walked up to their camp and asked if he could warm up by the fire. He spent about 3 hours talking and trading stories with everyone. He also had a white lab dog with him. All of a sudden, he said he had to go, so he started walking away. My dad was about to ask if he would stay the night when the cowboy disappeared into the forest with his dog. Later, when the camping came to an end, they asked about the man and his dog. As it turned out, they both had died in a flood of the nearby river years earlier. Another story was in the early 1990s. while my father was skateboarding with his two friends, Tim and Ryan. They saw in the sky a giant cloud, but oddly enough, it was shaped just like a Chinese dragon. Its eyes even reflected somehow, as if it was a real Chinese dragon in the middle of the Iowa sky. He said he could see his own reflection in the eyes of the white cloud-like dragon, a long snake-like body with horns like a bull and sharp claws like raptors' talons, sharp cat-like teeth, and even fish-like scales. But the part that stood out was its oddly human-like reflecting eyes. Now, this next story about him doesn't take place in one period of time, but throughout most of his life as a child. His bedroom was in an attic, and he says that the attic was haunted by a spirit of a loved one that every night would tuck him in while he was asleep, pulling blankets over him and putting his head on pillows. Here are some of my experiences. We used to have a dog named Megan, a black lab and a sweetheart. When I was 11 and she was about 8, a table flew off the floor and hit her in the body. A big wooden coffee table just flew at her. She was fine. Whatever did that did not like dogs. Another time, around 2011, I was hiking with my father and sister at a park called Riverside in Iowa. I was standing there while my dad talked to my sister. I saw a large, dark figure poking out of the bushes. It had a big, dark mane like a lion, and a thick, but oddly anteater-like face, dark black eyes and hooves. About a year later, in that same forest, I found hoof prints in the dirt, but it was as if they were left by something walking on its back legs. One of the strangest stories happened to me around 2013. My dad was having a bad day. He owed rent he couldn't pay, so he was being sued by the bank. And from there on, it just got worse. He punched a big hole in the wall out of rage. His hand was bleeding, and he wiped it on the wall. Little did he know, he had summoned a demon. The blood on the wall mixed with a rage far beyond normal, summoned a strange wolf demon. In his sleep, the demon attacked him. It had dark red eyes, fur as black as coal, a wolf's body, but it had strange human hands, white skin-colored human hands. It talked to my dad and said it was older than the human race. When my dad woke up, he thought it could have been a dream, until he saw the giant hand-shaped bruises around his neck. Number 7. Rotting cemetery ghoul. One of my many experiences happened a few nights ago. I live in a small town near Canyon City, Colorado. I had been with a few friends, walking from a showing of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. We were walking around down Main Street, and it was about 2:30 a.m. There were 6 of us: Lane and his boyfriend, Brad, Raven, October, Christoph, and myself. I go by Kitty, or Kitten. This was October of 2015. We were walking, and the street was dark and deserted. Being us, more emo, punkish in style and mentality, we were telling our morbid jokes and stories and such. We passed by Maine without a problem, and soon found ourselves at the local cemetery, a place I hadn't been since I was locked in a crypt 2 years before I've always been sensitive to ghosts and paranormal happenings, so the fact that my spirit guide, Geo as I call him, was wandering behind me was no surprise. All of my friends know of my encounter with being locked in a crypt with some not-so-friendly spirits. But they decided to wander into the cemetery anyways. Geo had given the okay, and since I was with a group of people, I was also okay. We were wandering, and Christoph is also very sensitive to the paranormal. He spotted the man first. I had an odd feeling. A feeling I normally get when a spirit is around. I looked up as Christoph pointed the man out. I looked at the man, who was dressed in a rotted suit and had his bones showing. He was terrifying. I immediately latched on Christoph's arm, as he is a bigger guy. The man locked eyes with me, then disappeared, and reappeared closer than before. I let out a blood-curdling scream, and started shaking violently. Now, mind you, I am very hard to scare. When I was trembling in fear, I felt as though I would pass out. My knees grew weak, and I sank down. I started bawling then. I wasn't exactly sure why I felt so scared. Everyone froze as the words rang out. "Where's Abby?" We watched as the man slowly limped towards us. Christoph wasted no time whisking me up, as I was too weak to stand, and carried me out of the cemetery, and the rest of the group following closely. The man didn't follow us, but I was traumatized. It wasn't my first encounter with that man, as he was the one who trapped me in the crypt 2 weeks before. For more bone-chilling narrative that will keep you at the edge of your seat, subscribe to my channel. By doing so, you'll gain access to a growing collection of real-life horror stories that will both captivate and energize your senses. Join the community of fellow enthusiasts, and together, let's explore the eerie unknown. Subscribe now, and prepare for more terrifyingly true tales that will leave you craving more.